Hello dear friends, welcome back again to another video from my YouTube channel. Dear friends, in our previous video, we discussed about the characteristic features of Anemophilous, Hydrophilous and Zoophilous flower. And by the end of our discussion in our previous video, we made it very clear that while comparing between self-pollination and cross-pollination is always better than a self-pollination for a plant. Why? Because the self-pollination, continuous self-pollination in a plant, it leads in bringing the inbreeding depression in the plant, whereas the cross-pollination results in bringing a new variety in the plant that leads to the evolution in the species. So, most of the angiospermic plants, they prefer to do the cross-pollination rather than the self-pollination. To do the cross-pollination and to avoid the self-pollination, majority of the plants, majority of the modern day plants, they developed certain devices in them. They modified themselves in such a way that they can perform the cross-pollination and they can avoid the pollen grains of its own. All such devices comes under the heading outbreeding devices. This concept, it is very important for both board as well as for competitive exams. In previous examination question paper, board examination question paper, this question was repeatedly asked for 5 marks, and in majority of the competitive exams, various outbreeding devices and their examples are asked in the competitive exams, my dear friends. So it is very important for our second year PUC syllabus. Now let us begin the outbreeding devices. First we'll define the outbreeding devices, then we'll try to understand the various devices in the plants one by one. Outbreeding devices are nothing but in flowering plants, some or many, in flowering plants, many devices are developed. Many devices are developed to avoid self-pollination, and to encourage cross-pollination. Here, these devices are developed, these techniques are developed by a plant to avoid the self-pollination and to facilitate the cross-pollination. Such devices are called outbreeding devices. Now let us try to understand the outbreeding devices in detail one by one. The first outbreeding device is Dicliny. This is the first outbreeding device. Dicliny, it is also called as unisexuality. Both are one and the same. Dicliny is a technical term given to the unisexuality. Uni means one. If any plant consisting of only one sex in it, such plants are called as unisexuality. Unisexuality condition means plants have only one sex, either male or technically either staminate flower or pistillate flower. The best example for unisexual plant is Carica papaya. It is a scientific name of papaya plant. Or Morus alba. These two plants are unisexual plant. That means there are two plants. Suppose this is a plant and B plant here. Consider this A and B plants are papaya plants. In this A plant, we have got only the staminate flower. That means definitely we have the male flower here. Here we have the pistillate flower. That means definitely it is having a stigma style and the ovary. Here plant A is a male papaya plant. Plant B is the female papaya plant. If this was a situation, then there is no scope for self-pollination and there is only one chance of getting the cross-pollination. Here the pollen grains are produced and all the pollen grains, they are dropped on the stigma of other plant. If the pollen grains are dropped on the stigma of another flower of another plant, is it self-pollination or cross-pollination? It is the cross-pollination. Here there is no stigma at all. It is not a bisexual flower. It is a unisexual flower. Such condition, such device is known as Dicliny or unisexuality. Now, this Dicliny and unisexuality in plants, it has developed only to facilitate the cross-pollination and to avoid the self-pollination. Then the second outbreeding device, second most outbreeding device is the self-sterility. Self-sterility. Self-sterility means if the pollen grains of the same flower dropped on the stigma of same flower, then such pollen grains never germinate. That means here self-pollination is not encouraged. That is known as self-sterility. Self-sterility scientifically can be defined as if the pollen grains of the same flower dropped on the stigma of same flower, then pollen grains fail to germinate. In this situation also self-pollination is avoided and cross-pollination is facilitated. The best example for self-sterility is tobacco plant. If the tobacco plant same flower pollen grain is dropped on the stigma of the same plant, then it will never germinate. Tobacco plant, Passiflora is the example. Its common name is fashion flower. Passiflora flotida is the complete scientific name of this plant. This is the second outbreeding devices. Then the third outbreeding devices is Dichogamy. Dichogamy means anther and stigma, that means androecium and gynoecium in a bisexual flower mature at two different times. For example, here we have a bisexual flower. In this bisexual flower we have the anther here and we have the stigma here. This is the gynoecium part and this is the androecium part. Both androecium and gynoecium, they will not mature at the same time, rather they mature at a different time. Say for example, androecium mature in the month of January. Whereas this gynoecium part, female part, it will get mature in the month of March. during the month of January, androecium get matured. That means it produces the pollen grains. If the pollen grains, they dropped on the stigma, but the stigma is not yet matured. When the stigma is going to mature? Stigma is going to mature in the month of March. That means there are two times of maturity of both androecium and gynoecium. Such condition is called as dichogamy. In common words, Dhula is ready, but Dulhan is not ready. Dhula is ready in the month of January, whereas Dulhan is not ready in the month of January. She will be ready in the month of March. So, the maturity time, there are two different maturity time of both androecium and gynoecium. Such condition is called as dichogamy. Dichogamy means androecium and gynoecium mature at two different times. Such condition is known as dichogamy. Dichogamy of two types. There are two types of dichogamy. One is protogyny. Second one is protandry. Protogeny and protandry. Protogeny means stigma mature before the anther. Before the anther. First stigma will mature, then the anther will mature. Such condition is called as protogeny. If anther mature before the stigma, anther get mature before the stigma, such condition is called as protandry. The best example for protogeny is mirabilis jalapa plant. It is commonly called as 4 o'clock plant. And the protandry's best example is Helianthus anus. Common name is sunflower. Sunflower scientific name is Helianthus anus. And Ocimum santum, tulsi mara, Ocimum santum. They in Ocimum santum and in sunflower, anther get matured first, then the stigma get matured. Whereas in Mirabilis jalapa, stigma mature first, then the anther get matured. Such condition is known as dichogamy. And the fourth type of outbreeding device is Herkogamy. Fourth type of outbreeding device is known as Herkogamy. Herkogamy means there is a physical barrier. There is a physical barrier. Barrier means obstacles, hurdles, walls. There is a physical barrier between stigma and anther. If here we have a stigma, here we have the anther. If there is a physical barrier between the stigma and the anther, this will definitely avoid the self-pollination, because here the pollen grains are there. Pollen grains never go like this. Here there is a physical barrier between stigma and anther. Such condition is known as Herkogamy. The best example is Calotropis. It is commonly called as Yakki Mara. Yakki Mara in Kannada, in Hindi it is called as Aag ka Jhad. a chimera. Herkogamy is the another outbreeding devices. Then the last outbreeding devices is heterostyly. Heterostyly. What do you mean by hetero? Hetero means different. If the length of the style is different than the length of the filament. What is that filament? Filament is present in the androecium and style is present in the gynoecium. Here, if the length of style is different than the filament of anther. How is this situation? Here, for example, this is the stigma and this is the style. Style in this flower is very, very long. And here we have the ovary. And this is the anther. This is filament. Look at the length of the style. Look at the length of the style and the length of the filament. They're different. Such condition is known as heterostyly. The length of the style is different than the length of the filament in the anther. That means filament length is different from the length of the style. Such device is known as heterostyly. The best example is oxalis. Oxalis is the example. Then primula. Primula, it is commonly called as prime rose. Primula plant. Then jasminum. Jasmine plant. They are all the examples. In all the devices, whether it may be a Dicliny, self-sterility, dichogamy, protogamy, protandry, herkogamy, heterostyly, you study any of the device. In any of the device, the self-pollination is avoided and cross-pollination is encouraged. All these devices are very, very important for your examination. Especially the examples are very, very important for competitive exams. I hope you people have understood the concept of outbreeding device. In our next video, we're going to study what is artificial hybridization. Till then, stay home, stay safe. Thank you so much.